Baldur's Gate 3 is an insanely huge game, with 3 acts spanning across vastly different open-world locations, and so much freedom of choice that one wrong move can cut you out of literally tens of hours of content. With so much to get through in one playthrough alone, it can be incredibly easy to miss out on powerful items of loot, interesting encounters which can matter later on, and just all-round little tidbits which further pad out one of the most lore-rich fantasy worlds of all time. So, pick your starting class and let's head to Faerun to uncover 25 hidden free gifts in Baldur's Gate 3. Ready? Then let's get to it. Starting things right off at the beginning of the game, this ancient crypt can be found right after we escape the Crash Nautiloid during the prologue. Right by our first fast travel point, this place might be easily forgotten about due to the fact that it's behind a locked door. Not necessarily something we can open this early on without Astarian's ace lockpicking skills or Gale's ability to open it with magic. Also, it's full of grave robbers and undead, so not necessarily something you want to be facing down, at least until you have a full and decently equipped party. However, once you do, you'll want to head back here pretty soon before going off into main story stuff. This place is full of useful loot which low-level you could really use, including multiple soul coins to power up Karlach's infernal engine in combat, a book of old gods which grants inspiration and allows us to reroll dice, but most importantly in the final chamber, an amulet which allows us to speak to the dead. Indeed, this spell is easily unlocked by magic users a little later on, but having it this early into the game can grant some extra narrative insights, which most people probably are gonna miss. Next up, getting a dog in Baldur's Gate 3 is doable extremely early on into Act 1. Once you come to the Emerald Grove, simply head a little west of the entrance gate across the stream to find the body of Gomwick, a courier from Triel who was killed by a pack of gnolls whilst on the way to deliver these letters to Baldur's Gate. All stuff you can learn with the help of a Speak to the Dead amulet. And, as unfortunate as this was for Gomwick, luckily his best boy Scratch survived the encounter, and provided you do a decent enough animal handling roll, he can be convinced to depart from Gomwick and join your party. Back in camp then, Scratch will bring you a ball. And not only do we get an achievement for throwing the thing, but we can also summon Scratch as a familiar to sniff out things in the world after that. Something you might want to only do though in zones that you've already cleared, since Scratch is going to easily die with his measly 5 health. Up next is one which can easily be screwed up if you approach it from the wrong angle, so be careful here. Coming down to the sea, next to the Emerald Grove, literally just outside the ritual circle, you'll begin to hear one of the most soothing and beautiful songs in the game, which honestly is a gift in and of itself, and perfectly captures the harmonious allure which one would expect from deceptively charming harpies. Your party too is going to be drawn in by this, but fighting them off during the windows of resistance, we will get 2 things. Firstly, the way will be open to the harpy nest, so we can now go and retrieve a couple nice treasures such as a magic ring, but also for saving the kid, hopefully, we'll be permitted entrance to Mole's hideouts. This will allow you to uncover any belongings which were stolen by the tiefling children, and it introduces us to Mole, a resourceful tiefling child who will no doubt grow up to lead an underground criminal empire. She's one of the many recurring characters across all 3 acts of the game, so it's worth meeting her now to fully bear witness to that character progression, as well as the fact that she seemingly regrows an eye whilst off-screen in Act 2, either with the help of Balthazar or possibly Raphael, but something I'll need to look into further before confirming. Something a little smaller next, but still at the Emerald Grove, a basic rescue with a basic reward. Nadira can be found on this little summit just up from the Emerald Grove gate, and once we approach her, it'll trigger an assassination encounter. With the ongoing goblin assault on this place, it's not surprising that a bugbear was dispatched to take out the sentry, though, provided we approach from this direction and not the side where the bugbear is, we'll arrive in time to trigger combat and save her. But all is not done. After this, we'll have to convince Nadira herself that we simply happened upon the situation and weren't in fact sent to kill her too. Convince her that we only reek of the hells thanks to being on the Nautiloid, and she, I suppose due to feeling indebted, will decide to give up the thing she was being so precious to protect. And whilst soul coins can be found in the crypt I mentioned at the start, this is no doubt one of the easiest and earliest ones to get in the game. Now, we could of course sell it for some extra coin, but since they're a very limited thing in the game, I'd recommend giving it straight to Karlach to hold onto. Every time she consumes one of these, she'll be given the Infernal Fury buff, adding between 1 and 4 fire damage to every attack when she's raging or below 25% health. Definitely a welcome thing to have in tougher fights for our Berserker tank party member. Heading up to Joaquin's Rest next, and the first time we come here, the place will be burning down. Our main objective for this one, of course, is to rescue Councillor Floric, something you definitely want to do as she plays a part in Will's questline especially, and can be a useful ally to have all the way into Act 3. However, I would recommend splitting your party up for this rescue mission, since there's actually another guy who needs saving over here. Now, rescuing Benryn is not necessarily a long-term mercy for him. He'll find in the next room that his wife Miri has not survived this arsonist attack, and telling us that the fault lies with an argument they had over a dowry. It's not a hugely rewarding side quest, but it is easy to miss and can be a right pain to complete since it's not clear where this dowry is hidden. But fortunately, it's actually not too far away. We can see it from here, in fact, amongst this haystack. And I mean, returning it to the guy feels fairly pointless given the rest of his world's literally burned to ashes around him, but I suppose it's something, maybe, to help him get back up on his feet. Or, equally, it's a good excuse to be an utterly horrible character, keeping this thing which means pittance to us and a lot more to this poor man. Though, at the same time, I mean, we did already run through fire to save his life, so there is that, and maybe he owes us. But with that small encounter out the way, it's onto something which can grant a small but very welcome buff across your entire playthrough. And this one requires a few steps, starting at the Emerald Grove. So, coming down here and speaking to Volo the Bard, he will ask us about the Nautiloid before claiming he's heading off to meet the goblins. A questionable choice for a guy who no doubt scores low on wisdom. And lo and behold, when we reach the goblin camp, Volo has been imprisoned and forced to perform for the goblins. But in the event that we choose to save him, he does feel somewhat inclined to repay us. Now, removing the illithid tadpole is arguably the main plot point tying the entire game together and driving the whole story. And it's only as time goes on that we realise how difficult achieving that is actually going to be. So of course, I just couldn't resist saying yes when Volo produced a needle and offered to remove the tadpole from behind our eye with brute force. It was a pure morbid curiosity of mine to see just how far the guy was willing to go in his attempts. And any sane person would definitely back out of this once Volo ups the ante to produce an ice pick. Still, I accepted just to see what would happen.
Volo tears the pick from your brain with a violent jerk. Your eye plops down into the mud.
Wow. Who could have seen that coming? Funny thing is though, this remarkably and hilariously stupid decision is actually a pretty smart thing to do. You see, feeling so guilty about half blinding us, Volo replaces our eye with a synthetic one, which he just happened to have lying around. And it turns out our new eye is actually way better than the last one, granting the ability to see any invisible enemies if they get close enough. This is exceptionally useful in certain fights, as I'm sure you can imagine, and obviously remains permanent after this. Bear in mind though, this does lock us out of the option to give an eye to Ethel the Hag, but to be honest, far as replacement eyes go, this is by far the superior one of the two. Just goes to show that sometimes pursuing the stupid option actually has its merits. So, continuing with that theme, we now come to Abdurak, also found in the Goblin camp, literally just over from where we free Volo. And he has a bizarre proposition which any sane mind would be inclined to say no to.
Go on, I have to see this.
But since Karlach finds the prospect of us being beaten against a wall by a mace voluntarily hilarious, well, I guess a dare's a dare. Now, whilst you might be inclined to act all tough in the face of pain to this guy who clearly gets a little too much of a kick out of it, the only way you're going to get the bonus here is by passing the performance checks where we scream out loud deliberately. Get through both of them and you'll be rewarded with the Loviatar's love buff, the boon of a literal dominatrix torture goddess, which grants a +2 to attack rolls and wisdom saving throws for 3 turns every time we fall below 30% health and lasts indefinitely, or at least until you die. An advantage which is going to prove very useful for the next challenge. Now, killing the 3 goblin leaders is no doubt something which most of you are going to do in your Baldur's Gate playthrough. After all, it's outlined as a quest objective, and I think the majority of people, myself included, tend to play a good character, at least on the first playthrough, to experience the maximum amount of content possible. But a fair warning for this one. One of the goblin bosses is actually Minthara, who has the potential to become a companion later in the game if we leave her alive. Of course, I think in the event of this, we're not technically supposed to have Halsin in the party as well, and I chose the druid on my first run. We'll play evil later, but just something worth considering before outright killing Minthara. Anyway, the free gift here actually relates to another of the 3 bosses, Dror Ragzlin, the toughest of the bunch in my opinion due to the fact that the guy is surrounded by minions. There's really no easy way to take him out without aggroing all of them too, but just like any fight with an open ledge, I'd recommend taking advantage of push spells and shove to send this guy cascading into the spider pit below. We can retrieve the loot from his corpse after, and may not even have to spite the fighters below if we free them. After that though, make sure to come back up to this stage of sorts and take a gander upstairs behind it for a literal treasure trove unlocked by the key from his body. It includes, of course, gold, potentially ideal pieces of armor, and most importantly at this stage, infernal iron. This is crucial to Karlach's quest back at the Emerald Grove, which you'll need to do to advance her storyline before heading into the Shadowlands. And another thing you'll want to do in the starting region, though this one can be completed at any time before Act 2's point of no return, is searching the cellar right by the fast travel point of the Blighted Village. This one actually took me a fair while to figure out its secret, but finally, by looking very carefully behind these crates, there's actually a pretty obscure lever, leading into a cave and a lab which once belonged to a necromancer. Plenty of cool hidden treasures down here, but most notably is this ancient book. The Necromancy of Thay, if read successfully, will grant a permanent +1 wisdom stat to whichever character reads it. So you can either give it to your main, or maybe min-max an already high wisdom character like Shadowheart. But before we can actually open this book, we're gonna need one more thing from yet another cave under the Blighted Village. Honestly, I don't get sometimes how these things don't overlap. But anyway, head down this well just outside the cellar's building, and we'll find ourselves in a lair of spiders. Fight through it and kill the matriarch, and we'll be able to loot the necromancer's dark amethyst just down here. With it, the book will open, and now you just need to wait for some decent dice rolls. In fact, if we hold on to this thing until Act 3, we'll be able to learn even more powerful knowledge by completing another puzzle at Sorcerer's Sundries with possession of this book. Into the Underdark now, and this perilous path is one of the 2 potential ones you can take in order to reach the Shadowlands of Act 2. This one is utterly teeming with little hidden things to discover. I could honestly make a whole video on just the Underdark, and quite possibly will. But for now, just come down to the southeast corner up to this little outcrop, right by the Selionite outpost in fact, which you'll go through if you access the place from the Goblin camp. Up here is a familiar looking sight and classic folklore Easter egg, a sword embedded in a stone. And whilst being a great hero who'll save the land may or may not be our chosen path, all that factors in here is whether or not we can pass the strength check. Doing so will acquire us the Falard Aluve, a drow longsword with the inscription reading, quote, "Though I have to leave you, I will dance forever in Eilestre's light," end quote. Eilestre, which I hope I'm pronouncing right, is a drow goddess from Forgotten Realms lore. She represents song, dance, swordwork, hunting, moonlight, and beauty. Fitting then that this sword should be enchanted with some song-based abilities, either giving allies an extra d4 damage boost or reducing enemies' saves and inflicting them with thunder damage. It may not be a primary weapon for anyone through the whole game, but it's defo worth picking up and using at least for a bit when you find yourself down here. Much further down into the Underdark though, and you'll eventually reach the Adamantine Forge, a place where you can craft super strong adamantine gear if you can find the right materials. To get to it, will require some careful operating and party splitting with this horizontal zipline contraption. But when we finally do get here, and once you're done with the forge, make sure not to miss this area just next to it. Getting through will involve navigating some temperamental explosive lava, so I'd recommend using turn-based mode. There is a lava elemental wandering around here, but I found it no trouble provided we don't aggro it. Unlock the adamantine chest on this old bit of ruin and retrieve the sentient amulet inside. Now, this is something I definitely should have given to my monk main character. It would have benefited them a whole lot more than Gale, so bear in mind it will get stuck on whichever character equips it, allowing us to restore key points and use the shatter spell, all at the expense of sometimes breaking out into hideous laughter. But hold on to the thing into Act 3, as though you have much choice, and you'll permanently be granted the Tasha's hideous laughter spell at the potential expense of wisdom, though you can avoid the debuff with some good rolls. This is honestly one of the most powerful spells in the game in my opinion, especially when fighting lots of powerful enemies, since the spell can incapacitate even the largest of foes for multiple turns. It's honestly insane and totally worth having equipped to multiple characters. Again, you probably just want to unlock this spell for a character who can't already cast it, say a non-magic user as opposed to a wizard. Final Underdark secret for this video then is actually an entire unmarked area, which can lead to a complete extra cave system inhabited by a fish people known as the Kuo-Toa, ex-captives of the Illithids who are able to manifest their gods by literally willing them into existence. When we find them, they're in the middle of making blood sacrifices to their god of murder, BOOAL. Definitely not to be confused with the actual god of murder Baal, who gets mentioned more later into the game. No, this time around it's merely a simple redcap, most of whom can be found occupying the Hag's Swamp above, though this one is taking advantage of this small underground civilization. Now, we have a few options to choose from here. Either we can kill the redcap and become ourselves the god of the Kuo-Toa, something Karlach finds hilarious.
We know you by your true name, Maklumpa.
Praise Maklumpa!
Or, and this is potentially the most beneficial thing to do here as it happens, we can suss out the redcap's ploy and allow him to bribe us to stay quiet. Or we can even sacrifice one of our own companions to get the same results. Defo not worth cutting off their storyline, but potentially worth trying out for shits and gigs. Anyway, the redcap, after doing this, will grant us the condition BOOAL's Benediction, which means, provided there exist Kuo-Toa to worship BOOAL, some of that power will be siphoned onto us, providing advantage on attack rolls against any bleeding creatures, i.e. 2 dice get thrown instead of 1, and the highest result is the one selected. Defo worth having, if you don't mind leaving these creatures to worship this false idol. Out into the Shadowlands of Act 2 now, and I will be keeping this as spoiler-free as possible when it comes to main story stuff, instead focusing still on the obscure hidden details. So, first up, we have this special pair of rings which can be found in and around the House of Healing. The first one, True Love's Caress, is just outside on the body of this skeleton, with the wife claiming in her diary that the bond between her and her husband is resilient, bending and bending, but not breaking. A bond which is literally tied, in a way, to the 2 rings that the lovers share. True Love's Embrace, then, can be found within the House of Healing on the body of this skeleton, the husband. His diary claims that his wife, a cleric of Shar as it turns out, opted to fight back when this place was attacked, but before running off to fight, quickly got married to her husband. A romantic gesture in the face of death, you ask? Ha, if only. No. Unfortunately, it's clear from reading between the lines here and looking at how the rings themselves work that these things were enchanted. Whoever wears True Love's Caress will get some great damage negation bonuses thanks to a ward cast by the wearer of True Love's Embrace, who themselves will be inflicted with all the same damage as their lover. The husband then was tragically turned into a damage sponge for his wife under the pretense of true love, with blood later leaking from his nose and strange wounds on his body, all of which were meant for his wife. Clearly the 2 eventually perished anyway, but kind of a dark tale, perfectly befitting the spiteful goddess Shar. And now we can, if we want, take advantage of the same mechanic, with the enchantment lasting until a long rest. Potentially worth taking advantage of to protect your cleric from the odd bit of damage, but at the expense of offsetting it to another character. Either way, make sure to pick them both up to potentially make use of this frightful enchantment. Eventually in Act 2, you'll wind up coming to Moonrise Towers, a place teeming with interesting encounters and hidden secrets, some of which have huge story implications, but here's one that's simply easily missable. Upstairs on the upper floor, we have the quarters of Ketheric Thorm and the wizard Balthazar. It'll be restricted throughout most of the act, but by using a rogue like Astarion, sneaking around it should be child's play. There's a ton of stuff in these rooms worthy of a thorough look around, including a Githyanki disc which can impart some extra crucial lore, though more obscure than this is one of Balthazar's many hidden secret labs. This thing is hidden behind a bookshelf which itself has a ton of trap trigger books which can raise the dead and release poisonous gas. The actual key to open it then lies within this altar, which requires the sacrifice of a human heart, something surprisingly easy to come by in this room. Getting inside then, we can find a ritual table wherein moon lanterns have been crafted, and we can also learn a bit more information in regards to the Night Song quest, though a slightly more material reward would be in the form of a magic hat, which can inflict encrusted with frost as a bonus condition on their target, providing a brief disadvantage on dexterity throws. Such an easy room to miss, so make sure to check it out. Now, Act 2 features several grotesque bosses, particularly in the old buildings around the main shadow-cursed area, but one that I simply stumbled across as opposed to being sent on a quest to specifically find was the Toll Collector. Garango Thorm is no doubt a relative to J.K. Simmons' Ketheric Thorm, but thanks to Ketheric's heretical actions, she's contorted and twisted into a lumbering pile of gold, eternally cursed to collect the tolls from those passing through. But, like any metal automaton running entirely on logic circuits, it is possible to argue her to death. First though, I reckon we could maybe bore her to death by tossing her a gold piece one by one when she asks for the toll, though I soon decided after about 10 of those that I'd probably die of boredom first. And when she did explain she was actually after literally all of our gold, it became clear that this event going in her favour would be utterly catastrophic for us. The problem is that when fighting her, she's going to get a damage multiplier, one directly tied to how much gold we have. Fortunately, as a monk, I was able to convince her that the gold was hers, to which she decided to give it all back, which, being made of gold, evidently meant that I avoided the boss fight entirely, though this also seems to be a possible thing to pursue with a pure deception check, so maybe try instead speaking to her as a Starian. Once the Toll Collector is finally out the way, we will be free to run around and pick up a lot of gold. Unsurprising, seeing as how she was made of it. Additionally, we'll be free to roam the Toll House for all the other hidden secrets it's housing, including a guy who got locked inside this safe and apparently starved to death, and a lower floor room which can only be accessed by breaking the floorboards from the room above, next to where the Toll Collector was. So defo make sure to check this one out in full at some point in Act 2. Now, hopefully, in Act 2, Last Light is going to remain a beacon of safe haven for survivors to seek refuge from the Shadow Curse. If not, you may have made a couple misguided decisions, straight up errors, or just be playing an evil character. Regardless, just outside where the aura of protection might be is this building, so very dark that regardless of any warding you have against the Shadow Curse, entering it will trigger turn-based mode and you'll want to get in and out in as few moves as possible, taking shadow damage at the end of every one. Make sure to enter it with a character who has the knock spell, since unlocking this chest technically in combat isn't nearly as feasible. Inside is the Penumbral armor, a light armor which awards the wearer a +3 to any stealth checks. I gave it to Astarion, and it remained his armor for the rest of my playthrough, proving an ideal bonus anytime I needed one character to sneak around and steal stuff in places they shouldn't. And it's going to prove thoroughly useful for the rest of Act 2 and Act 3. Again, it's located just down in this seemingly pitch black area just east of Last Light. Remember the Kuo-Toa from the Underdark? Well, turns out that wasn't their only settlement. Sadly though, the second settlement we can find happened to be occupying the Shadowlands, again just outside the safety of Last Light. Though to access this area, we'll have to venture right around the map to the Mausoleum entrance, coming down just east from that place, and it won't be long before we wander into the ambush of these shadow-possessed fish people. They're pretty obsessed with immobilizing us with nets, so it might be worth bringing a ranged party for this encounter. Though I found the best way to deal with them is to approach this group here and take them all out with splash damage before they get a chance to spread out. After defeating these poor cursed souls, be sure not to miss the painted chest just here containing some useful magical arrows, as well as the lightning jabber spear on the Kuo-Toa chief, a weapon which not only inflicts bonus lightning damage, but can also be thrown in an emergency. Also, right next to these guys, be sure to check out this little cave entrance to a secret chamber under the House of Healing Mork. Down in these depths are some fetid oozes and a hollow armor knight, who, when killed, will drop a set of armor which can resist necrotic damage, an extremely useful buff to have during the latter half of Act 2. And also during that latter half, our adventures are going to take us into the Temple of Shar, a sprawling labyrinth complete with many trials, powerful enemies, and hidden secrets. A bunch will need completing for the main story to advance, but one which isn't that obvious is this riddle found down in the Library of Shar, a chamber which is geniusly enchanted with an aura of silence. Fitting, but proves a real pain for any magic users since it doesn't allow for spellcasting. Suffice it to say, you'll probably want to bring characters like Karlach and Lyzel, as opposed to maybe Gale. Defeat the librarian portal thing and the justiciars, and the library will be yours to wander freely. Though still be careful, because somebody has genuinely gone to the trouble of somehow trapping the bookshelves themselves. And to advance this puzzle, you're going to have to loot at least one of them. See, this button here will lower this gate, granting us access to the riddle of the night. What can silence the night song? The answer is found on the third bookshelf back, right of the gate, and is fairly obvious once you read it, since the first line is literally that riddle, claiming that light and life is an illusion, whilst oblivion, darkness, and nothingness is all you need. Things which can only be found in the embrace of the night singer, Shar, a spiteful and horrible goddess in my opinion, though I'm yet to dive in and read up some deeper lore on her, so that's a surface level opinion. Anyway, place this book on the altar for access to the chamber behind. Everything found within is heavily linked to Shadowheart as a character especially, and this spear is actually crucial in advancing her story, so be very sure not to miss this one. In addition to that, we have the Dark Justicia helmet in a chest over here, and on the floor just by the spear, the Dark Justicia half-plate. Gear that I found great for Shadowheart, regardless of the path you take with her, heading into Act 3. Before we get there though, quick stop off again at Moonrise Towers, or rather this time, under it. The Mind Flayer colony is teeming with interesting oddities, the obvious of course being Mind Flayers and quest-related objectives, but also another laboratory of Balthazar's can be located down here. This time, he's devised a machine made up of a head and an altar, allowing us to communicate with those Mind Flayer brain jars, which can be found not just here, but also on the Nautiloid, right at the start of the game. So make sure to hold onto those and bring them down here with you. But even if you haven't happened to have done that, there's still plenty of brains to communicate with, including, disturbingly, that of a child who keeps calling you mummy.
I'm just very sleepy, mummy.
But the one that actually gives us a genuine bonus is locked behind this puzzle. Connecting up these parts of the brain will grant access to a chamber behind, with the main attraction being a scary cutscene looking at this wall of illithid stonework. More importantly though, is this mind on the ground. See, this belonged to a Githzerai, the more spiritually inclined cousins of the Githyanki, and people who've similarly fought countless wars against the Gake, or illithids or mind flayers. This one, it turns out, has been trapped in this jar for multiple centuries, and has been aware of its hopeless, imprisoned existence throughout the entirety of that time. It's also the only mind intelligent enough to realize immediately that it's communicating through the severed head of an elf. The offer it extends to us then is that of its precious Githzerai knowledge, in exchange for an end to its eternal suffering and torment. Wipe its mind and let it die or potentially return to limbo, and will be granted the Githzerai mind barrier condition, which essentially translates to getting dice roll advantage on intelligence saving throws. Again, a very useful thing to have, though potentially best granted to an intelligence-based character that you want to min-max, such as Gale. And now we're on to Act 3. Again, I will not be talking about any plot points related to the main story, but will be discussing locations you may, or possibly may not, but should wind up visiting during your playthrough. So, first and foremost is an unlikely ally, which can be found immediately when we arrive in Rivington by heading up here to this barn. Inside is a strange ox, and if you want to do this quest fully, you're going to need a way to speak to animals, either using a druid or with a potion of animal speaking, or some such. After this, you'll suss out that this is indeed no ordinary ox. But in order to get it on side as an ally, which is ultimately the reward here, you'll have to stow your curiosity for the time being, and just agree to smuggle it into the city despite not knowing its intentions. After which it will shapeshift into an inconspicuous apple, which you just have to hold on to until you get inside the walls. I did kind of worry that this might be an evil decision. We did after all see some visions of murder and death by reading this ox's mind, and who's to say it won't immediately go on a killing spree or something. That said, if you pay attention carefully, this ox does crop up at multiple earlier points in the game, and honestly seems fairly content, at least now, with just living the life of an ox, regardless of how colourful its past may be. Overall, whatever the hell this thing is, it turns out to be a pretty pleasant creature, and more importantly, a powerful ally, at a time, let's say, when we could really do with its help. Seriously, help the strange ox. Next up in the Rivington area still is a tiny little quest which can be started by visiting Sword Coast Couriers, a messenger pigeon service located just up here. Danzo Arkwright will immediately tell us he's recently been struggling with many of his pigeons getting snapped up out of the sky, not reaching their destinations, and more seriously losing their confidential material to the risk of any old sod stumbling across it. Completing this one is first going to require some form of flight spell or excellent jumping capabilities, for which I decided to use Gale, being a wizard for which flying is simply easy. Turns out though that choosing him for this quest is quite possibly the best way to go about it, given the perpetrator of such a violent assault on pigeons just so happens to be one of Gale's closest friends. Tara can be found up on the roof of the adjacent open-hand temple, a winged cat called a Trezum who Gale summoned as a child due to wanting a pet cat, and they've remained friends ever since.
Tara, I don't suppose you're responsible for the missing messenger pigeons.
One needn't guess. Pigeon meat is my second favourite.
I'd offer you some of your favourite meat, but I haven't got any. Beholder jerky is surprisingly hard to come by.
Now, I believe if other members of your party encounter Tara with Gale, or indeed without him, then you can berate her and tell her to stop eating the pigeons. But since I flew up here and was thus alone, I didn't even get any dialogue choices, which is weird for this game. Gale just asked if it was her eating the pigeons and proceeded to do literally nothing about it. It felt strange having a fully voiced cutscene after so many half-unvoiced dialogue options, but I kind of love the fact that Gale, if alone, doesn't even bother to ask her to stop. At the end of the day, I suppose that's his friend and she can do what she wants. Plus, you'll get a magic ring and upon returning the letters, Danzo's eternal gratitude. Also some coin. So, make sure if you're doing this little side quest to ensure you have Gale in your party. Another secret in Rivington, and I suppose a general lesson for this game overall. If you ever see a well, then assume it's the entrance to an underground cavern, as is the case with this one just here. It's not a huge place down here, though it does have a backpack, buried chest, and not to mention several murdered refugees, one of whom holds the answer to the question I had before even going into this game of who is Baldur and why does he own gates. It goes into some lore about the adventurer Balduran who set sail from Grey Harbour, returning with untold riches and building it up into the city we see today, that of Baldur's Gate. The entire city seemingly got renamed this from Grey Harbour after one of the gates were named in Balduran's honour. Now, there is a lot more lore we can learn about Balduran during this game, and he definitely deserves his own dedicated video. For now though, that's his basic backstory. An adventurer, just like us, who must have been very smart and very calculated. More to the point though, is just who murdered all these poor refugees in the cave under this well? Well, according to another letter found, it appears to be a hate crime, either inflicted by angry locals or perhaps even the Flaming Fist themselves. If anyone has any further evidence on this, then please comment it down below. Now finally shoot this wheel, and we can exit the cave via the secret exit, bringing us out by the cliffs. Okay, so the next item can actually be found within the main city. By heading down to the Water Queen's house, this one totally involves breaking in and stealing it, so stealth is going to be a crucial factor here. As usual, with stuff like this, I'd recommend running with Astarion if you're using the classic character builds. Head past this congregation in the main area and up the stairs to the left, just through this door, and you may need to employ some invisibility depending on your relationship with these water-loving people. Inside the chest, through this room, we can find the Wavemother's cloak, but more interestingly, a key to Vault 4 in the counting house. We'll come down to this place anyway as part of the Stone Lord questline, but basically, there's a whole bunch of vaults here which can technically be picked by Astarion if you save scum and keep rolling 20s and 30s. But finding the actual keys, in my opinion, help knowing they exist, is a far more rewarding and fun way to do it. This one contains the Trident of the Waves, which creates water around attacked enemies. A decent weapon, but not as good in my opinion as the next Trident entry on the list. So one more bonus thing regarding the Water Queen's house is this obscure cave out the back of it. It's got a whole hoard of treasure inside and mysteriously but unsurprisingly a dead Kuo-Toa, though there's no way of navigating this cave without aggroing the women within, sadly. Just a cool little bonus that's easy to miss then, though one I suspect might have had a bigger role in some of the cut content we've been hearing about. Honestly, there's so much content we can accidentally obliviously breeze past in this game though that I couldn't say for certain whether it's cut content or we needed to do something else earlier on. One fairly large bonus area, which is certainly hidden though, can be discovered by coming back to the circus in Rivington. Here, we can encounter all sorts of interesting people and activities, with one of the most notable being a genie who asks you to play Spin the Wheel. And by passing a perception check, it soon becomes clear that the guy is cheating to make sure nobody ever wins. Now, bear in mind, depending on our choices, he will refuse to let us play multiple times, but that's a character-specific lock. So if he refuses to let one of your characters play, simply switch to someone else to progress this quest. What we need to do is successfully pickpocket his magic ring, the source of his ability to cheat. After that, simply spin the wheel again, and we will miraculously win. Furious though at our counter-cheating, the genie will banish us to the D&D equivalent of Jurassic Park, or as it's called in the Forgotten Realms, the jungle-infested dinosaur-roaming land of Chult. To escape, we'll have to fight off multiple dinosaurs and reach the exit portal, transporting us back to the circus. Bear in mind though, that you'll only have the character who was banished in there alone, so maybe take one of your strongest solos. Before you pass back through the exit portal though, make sure to head up here to loot the body of a deceased person who made the exact same mistake we did, and apparently didn't have an escape portal. On them, we can also loot the band of the Mystic Scoundrel ring, allowing us to make weapon attacks and illusion or enchantment spells in the same go, making the spells bonus actions. A potentially useful item to have for any spell sword style characters that you're running with. However, the grand prize of this place is locked inside a chest directly in front of the portal. Nirulna is a legendary trident and definitely lives up to the name, doubling as both a melee and ranged weapon. This thing can be thrown but will always return to you. You cannot be forced to drop it, and additionally throwing it does up to 12 extra thunder damage within a 6-meter radius. It adds 3 bonus meters to movement speed and jump distance, and has the insane ability of making you immune to fall damage. Yes, this weapon basically turns you into an OP version of Aquaman, and I would seriously recommend acquiring it as one of the very first things you do in Act 3. Plus, it does like a very decent amount of damage on top of all of that. Just seriously, go and get it, it's so good. Final item for this video's list then revolves around a quest you may or may not take on, which involves descending to an underwater prison known as the Iron Throne. Yeah, I know, but just put Game of Thrones out your head for a second and focus. This is a really tough quest. You will only have 6 turns to break out as many prisoners as you can and return them to the vessel in the center before the prison is destroyed. Additionally, you've got fish people continually spawning in and casting nets to harass you and, more annoyingly, the prisoners. I did manage to return every single one home safely, but it definitely took a few tries and a fair amount of luck. The key here is to split your party up to handle various wings of the prison all at once. It's the only way to cover all of the ground. On top of all of that pre-existing challenge though, what if I told you that focusing purely on the prisoners means you're missing out on several decent pieces of loot further down the corridors of the Iron Throne? Here's what they are, so you can decide what's more important to you, saving lives or the treasures about to be lost forever. Of course, we have gold, left, right, and center, but the unique treasures down here include the key to Vault 6 of the Counting House, found up in the northern part of the prison. The vault itself contains, most usefully, a Mind Flayer parasite specimen, in addition to a few documents which help to pad out the lore and motivations in regards to one of the game's major villains. Information you may want to be aware of before progressing past certain points, and something I'll no doubt cover during some more spoilery deep dives in the future. For now though, just know that it's worth looting this vault for the parasite alone, though you don't necessarily need the key if you get lucky with some lockpicking. And yes, lockpicking it'll have to be, since all these vaults are entirely spellproof, which does make total sense from a gameplay standpoint. Anyway, down the southern end of the Iron Throne, arguably more perilous to get to, is a laboratory of sorts, containing yet another Mind Flayer specimen, in addition to this time a couple marginally useful arrows. Honestly, this one's only really worth getting if you're going for a run of heavily speccing into Mind Flayer abilities, but defo worth getting if you are. After all, these worms aren't tremendously common, whilst the Mind Flayer abilities themselves can provide some game-changingly powerful psionic moves to your roster. So now you decide, saving prisoners or getting loot. Or, if you're up for a mighty challenge, you could try your hand at both in one run. A very big good luck with that, I couldn't manage it. Now, comment below any other small or potentially massive other hidden free gifts in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to note them down for potential future videos. Honestly, the last 2 weeks of my life have been been utterly consumed by this game, either playing it or immersing myself in the lore, and I've got a ton more video ideas I want to make for Baldur's Gate 3. Juggling that alongside Starfield and Phantom Liberty though is gonna be interesting. But rest assured, there is more Baldur's Gate stuff to come as soon as I have the time to make another video. So thank you, as always, to my amazing patrons for your continued support, and for giving me more freedom with my time to check out amazing new games like this one. Finally, thank you for watching. I'm Sam Bram, and I'll see you soon in another video.